Cameron Vernon, Northwood athletic director, joining us now. And Cameron has put together a proposal to allow co-op teams in North Carolina high school sports in the NCHSAA specifically. He put together a proposal that went to the board of directors in the winter meeting in 2025 in December, and then again in the spring of 2026. And Cameron, you also presented a proposal, I guess, or information. I don't think it was really a proposal, but information about how co-op teams work at the North Carolina Athletic Directors Association conference this spring in Asheville. I had the opportunity to listen in on that. I was excited to hear about that. But for people who may not be as familiar with what co-ops are, can you explain what a co-op is when it comes to high school sports?
Sure. And just I wanted to share, BJ Condren was with me during
Yeah,
that presentation. So at Southeast Alliance, I don't want to dismiss that. He participated as well. He's a good
he
friend of
did.
mine. Sure. But so co-ops. So co-ops are it's a opportunity that many other state associations have when a school is unable to field a team in a particular sport. So we see a lot going on with football currently. And so in other states, when those things happen and kids aren't able to play, they can go into an agreement with a neighboring school so that the kids at that school can participate on the team at the neighboring school. They can still be a student at their home school. They can still be with their friends and their teachers. It's just that when they want to play that sport and have the opportunity, they go to the neighboring school to participate.
I can already hear the people in my ear right now saying, "Oh, that's just how people are going to create super teams."
Sure.
That
Competitive
was
imbalance is the
r-
fear.
right. So that was one of the things you addressed at the athletic directors conference. What explain how that issue is prevented in this setup?
Sure. I did a lot of digging because after the winter board meeting, that was one of the concerns that was brought up by some of the board of directors. And I spent a lot of time researching, Nick, and the only instance where I could see a co-op that won a state championship was, I believe, in Maine, and it was in gymnastics. So there really wasn't a competitive imbalance that was seen. So how can we prevent that? Well, it's not just I call you up as another athletic director, Nick, and I say, hey, let's put our football teams together, and you know, we just roll it out, right?
Mhm.
There's a process that would need to be done, and the NCHSAA would absolutely need to be involved, just as other state associations are when this happens. So, in my proposal, what I've researched through other states, it takes both schools to be in agreement of this, and we not to say both schools. It's superintendents, it is principals, it is athletic directors, and they present it to their state association along with data, and that data would show either an inability to field a team, or it would show lower participation numbers, that a committee at the NCHSA could look at and determine, is this warranted in this situation? And also in other states, when you talk about the competitive imbalance, of course, when you're bringing two schools with two different enrollments together, you can't put school A and school B together that are now 1,200 kids, but they're still playing at a 3A high school, right? With 6 to 700. So what other states do, and what I proposed here in North Carolina, is if we were to put this into place, you would take 100% of the student enrollment at the larger school plus 50% of the enrollment at the smaller school. So, example, school A has 600 kids, they go in a co-op with school B, who has 400. You take 600 and 200, so your enrollment would be 800, and that would place you in an appropriate classification. There would be some legwork with this, right? You would have to do some adjusting to teams and classifications, and possibly conferences. But this isn't just again, you and I calling each other. This is a whole process that would have to be approved and data shared and looked at before both teams participate together.
And I believe the proposal that you gave said that the two co-op schools would have to be from the same LEA or school district, right?
Sure. I mean, in other states, North Carolina is different. If you look at other states, where I grew up in Pennsylvania, where co-ops are allowed, it's more of a city school district, right? Um, And so they work with neighboring municipalities that are pretty close together. But here in North Carolina, because we do have county school districts in many cases, I think the easiest way to do this would be to keep it in house and in your local LEA. I think it becomes problematic at times. You know, if, I'm here in Chatham. If we were to go into a co-op with somebody next to us in Randolph, when you talk about travel, when you talk about the communities, the different school boards, different school districts. So, yes, under my proposal, to just get it started, I felt it was best and easiest if we say it has to be within the local LEA.
The other thing I thought was an interesting point or an important point when I was listening to your presentation and BJ's presentation, was that the co-ops are not meant to be a permanent solution. It's supposed to be more like a bridge that preserves the sport until both schools can field teams independently. Correct?
Correct. And I mean, I'm pretty familiar with Graham High School and the news that came out, and I hope that all those kids, I think it was around 18 that they have, that they continue to play the JV team. But I know there's also in some cases where these kids are going to be like, you know, I can't play varsity football, and they might stop playing and go find something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, the purpose is to preserve it and it's to build on it. And co-ops in many cases, it's just a short time frame. Might be might be 4 years, but the ultimate goal is to bring back that program at the home school and to be able to sustain it.
Where did this idea come from? What was there a particular situation that made you start thinking about this?
Sure. For me, I said earlier, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and so ever since I was in high school, I know that co-ops existed. It wasn't the norm; it was the exception in many cases. And where I'm from, it was particular sports like tennis was one of them. And it started really resonating with me when here at Northwood we had, I think in 2019, we had 1,467 kids to be exact, because I had to appeal to move to a lower classification. But we had the opening of Seaforth High School shortly after the pandemic, and our population went from 1,467, where last year we had 585 kids. And you hear about all the, you know, the struggles of opening a new school, right? And, you know, getting things started, and totally valid, right? I have friends who've opened new schools. It's extremely difficult in starting new programs. However, I could make the argument it's just as difficult on the other side when you have all these programs established and you have a culture established, and 800 kids just left your school to go to a new school, right?
Yeah.
So my fear at Northwood is always our lacrosse programs. You know, we've been able to sustain them the past couple of years. I'm very proud of that, but it's going to be a yearly concern for us unless I see our population numbers go up. And so that really got me thinking for my program, hey, you know, what if we can't field lacrosse? What am I supposed to tell these kids? What am I supposed to tell these parents? Hey, sorry, you can't play. No, in education, we want to provide opportunities for children. We don't want to take them away. And you know, I try to be proactive and looking at the trends that we had at our school. And you know, I want to have a solution if it does happen. And also, when we went into a different classification, different conference, I started noticing. You know, I used to be in a conference with Graham. We used to be in a conference with Chatham Central, and they've struggled with football numbers. Other schools don't have tennis teams in our conference. So I would look at them, and I felt for them. You know, I haven't been in that position where we haven't fielded a team. And so, you know, I care about kids, not just the kids at Northwood High School, but the kids throughout the state. And I want them to have the opportunities. And so that's what really got me thinking. And, you know, hearing news like we're hearing this week, I don't think it's okay that we don't have a solution to this. And it is a problem, and it's not going to change.
Yeah, and before we start recording, I was telling you the reason you and I talked about this several months ago about doing a conversation about this more broadly, but I told you the thing that kind of sparked it in my mind this week was all of these football teams that we've heard of in the past several weeks having to cancel football, varsity football, or in some cases JV football, because of low participation. But as you point out, football gets a lot of attention because it's football. That's the thing that gets a lot of media coverage. But this may be even a bigger issue in sports that don't get as much attention. You mentioned lacrosse, but I mean, there's teams that or schools that can't field soccer teams every year, and we're seeing issues in girls basketball even and softball in some places. So um, I do think it's important for people to realize that the issue goes far beyond just football, right?
Sure. And in my presentation, and I was looking at the numbers earlier, I was able to retrieve data with the help of the association. We talked about lacrosse. It was 75 and 73% respectively of teams in our state that don't fill lacrosse programs. I mean, but that's a fairly new sport. You get that. But I even saw, it was in upper 20s wrestling for boys and girls. Golf was a fairly high, in my opinion. Of course, we're in a basketball state. There were very few teams who weren't able to field basketball, but it is across the board. And also, Nick, I think about when I was talking to some friends in Charlotte in the inner city schools with different demographics, the Olympic sports struggle in some of those areas. I was talking to some colleagues in Mecklenburg County, and they see it in tennis, they see it in swimming, where they have kids who want to participate, and their answer to those kids is, sorry, we don't have enough participation in order to field a team. So you're not going to grow those sports either in those communities where you might have larger minority populations, and you want to grow the sports with those subgroups, and that's problematic.
One of the I don't know if it's an issue necessarily, but I guess one of the things that people may bring up would be, if you bring in kids from another school to play sports at whatever school A is, are you then taking away opportunities to participate for the students who are based at that school? And I know that was one of the things that came up in your presentation as
Yeah,
well.
so when I've researched states who have implemented co-ops, they have to agree to a no-cut policy. So, again, if my student athletes were coming to your school, Nick, you know, if we were cutting, there would be a possibility that at the home school where the sport's taking place, that kids weren't making the team. So that's not the case, but it would. I mean, potentially, when you combine teams from other communities, the home school that allowed the other school to come on board with them, it might affect their playing time, and I'm sure that could be problematic. Um, my friends in my home state of Pennsylvania, the conversations I've had, I have not heard of those issues, but I'm sure they happen. And I'm sure that you have to be proactive when you do this, and you have to have conversations with your kids and parents that this may happen. It probably will happen, but we're also trying to help another school out. We're trying to help another community out and provide kids with the opportunity. But it would be for sure.
Yeah, I think it's putting like there are examples of this happening in North Carolina in the independent league,
Yeah. Mhm.
not in the NCHSAA. Although I think you could probably find situations in the NCHSAA where like schools are consolidating
Mhm.
and they start consolidating their athletic programs together. You could find examples of that. I think particularly in some of the rural areas where we've seen some consolidation in the last several years. When you presented this to the athletic directors, um, did you what kind of reaction did you get back from those who heard the presentation, and what have you heard from them since then?
Sure. I think a lot of times I think it's the first time they've ever heard of it, which is, to hear this for the first time, it might be like, what in the world is this guy talking about? It might be like the boogeyman, right? Where's he from? But if you do your research, I think it was 28 states, and I should have looked at my notes a little better. 28 states have already approved this. I think Ohio recently, I posted on my social media, the Ohio State Legislature just approved it within the past month or two. So that's 29 or 30 states that are now allowing it. But the reaction, a lot of questions, competitive imbalance. I think they had a hard time kind of wrapping around in their minds, how would this work at my school? How would I work with another, school if I wasn't able to field a team? But also, my friends at Carteret County, Michael Turner at West Carteret, he went back to his school district, and Nick, I'm sure you saw. I might be pronouncing his name wrong, but Blair Prost. who's the assistant superintendent at Carteret County Schools, he actually submitted a very similar proposal for co-ops, and he and I have been in communication, and he's all for it as well. The Carteret County ADs, and there might have been another neighboring school district and county that was on board with it from their district. I think they see the benefits of this, and they're seeing some changes in their participation numbers as well, in particular sports, where they see that this could be very effective, and it can, help with those participation issues. So it was mixed, and I don't think anyone was like, man, no way, this is bad. I think it was more like, I need to wrap my head around this more. And I also think, like in the case of the Carteret County folks, this is a good idea and it's worth pursuing. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does take some time to, if you've spent all your time here in North Carolina, I think it does take time to understand it. It took me time to understand it,
Sure.
as well, because the first thing you think of is, oh, you're going to create super teams, right?
Right.
Um,
And I mean, Nick, if I may,
yeah,
you mentioned this. I watched another podcast. The issue with super teams would be from co-ops. It's going to be from this transfer stuff that's going on throughout our
yeah,
state. I mean, you mentioned it. People posting from athletic departments on an incoming transfer, kids posting it. That's where the super teams are made. These backdoor communications that are already occurring right now with coaches and parents, and that's the issue. This one is, we want our kids to be able to play.
right.
That's what we're trying to solve here. Allow them the opportunity.
And I think that's the key word, right? Is the opportunity. And in the high school sports, you're supposed to create as many of those opportunities as you can, for the high school players and
And what's our
students.
solution right now here in the state of North Carolina?
There isn't one. You just
I
can't
know,
play.
I know, you can't play. And I correct me if I'm wrong. I might be remembering it correctly, but I remember years ago there was a school district that didn't field football, and from what I'm remembering, they allowed those kids to transfer from that school to another school in their local LEA, and they were able to play football there. And to my knowledge, a lot of kids, took that advantage and went to the other school and played football. But that might solve the football problem. Let's think about this. You have a child who is doing well at that school, who has friends, who has relationships with their teachers. We talk about mental health with our kids too. And now they have to decide, do they want to be with their friends and be at their home school, or do they want to play football? And they have to make that decision, right? So there's that problem. And then those kids that also left, what if they were multi-sport athletes, right? So
Yep.
they left the school, went to play football. They didn't have to necessarily return. They could have stayed at that school the entire year. So how does that impact basketball? How does that impact wrestling? How does it impact baseball, softball, all those other sports, track and field? You've lost potentially some strong athletes there. So some school districts, again, I'm almost positive that's what's happened with some school districts. They've allowed that transfer to take place. That's not the right solution either.
Yeah.
This is simple. Let the kids stay at their school with their friends, with their teachers. Let them continue to do well academically, socially, behaviorally, and let them find a way, whether it's a bus that you provide or whether it's transportation from parents or their cars, and let them go to the school that's nearby and suit up and play. It's that
Yeah.
simple.
I won't pretend to know all of the rules for each individual school district. But I think that's one of the interesting pieces of this, from an eligibility perspective, is eligibility in large part is up to each individual school district. Transfer rules are up to each individual school district, to a degree. So while that may be a solution, in some districts, it's definitely not in all districts.
Correct.
I think this is a state rule. You're not supposed to transfer for athletic purposes anyway. So,
Yeah.
does that kind of grade that rule? I'm not sure. But it'd be great if we could have fewer transfers because of opportunities, and just allow people to go play sports where they exist. The other piece that kind of came to mind for me was, there's a lot of discussion about homeschool students and, there's a lot of districts that have early colleges and different types of schools, and they're all treated differently, and how they can play sports in various districts as well. That feels like a similar situation, so sort of, not exactly the same, but similar. That, maybe a situation like this could help resolve. Um, you you sent the proposal to the NCHSAA in December. You got some feedback, you said, and went back and got some more information. It went back in the spring again. I think it was tabled. I don't think it actually got a vote. What have you heard any feedback since then, or has there been any movement on this since?
No, and again, Blair Prost, again, I hope I'm saying his name correctly. We did talk after that, and I think we both shared our frustration, disappointment. But he made some phone calls. I think he had, as assistant superintendent, he has some better contacts than I do. And what he came back to me and said that Miss Tucker was going to form a committee to have some further discussion about this.
And obviously there'll be a new commissioner, Brad Alford, in a few months. So maybe an opportunity to talk about that further. And he comes from the Department of Public Instruction. I don't know. I probably should have asked you this before we started recording, so apologies for that. Has there been any discussion about this with DPI or the State Board of Education? Because I imagine if this got traction, it would eventually have to go through them.
Sure. I mean, I did have some email communication with him after the first time. I do know I was told that maybe that would be the best route after my winter meeting proposal, and so I did reach out. And the current role and with DPI, with the association, and I'm not trying to say it exactly, but to the effect of you have to participate in the school in which you're enrolled in, right? So if I'm enrolled at Northwood High School, I have to participate in sports at Northwood High School. Doesn't allow the Northwood student to participate at neighboring Seaforth. So that rule is what people are sticking to, and I understand that. But again, I will make mention that I've been here long enough where we didn't allow student athletes to receive financial incentives,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And this world is changing. And so we had rules in place where that's not allowed. And there's rules now where we say that we do allow that. So people have the ability to make change. It's just, are they willing to?
Rules are not etched in stone in the year 2026.
You're going to agree
uh,
on that?
is there anything about the proposal that you have changed or think you should change after having some discussions and feedback, or are there things that you think need further evaluation?
Look, I'm not a really smart person, but I'm smart enough to beg, borrow, and steal. And everything that I've put in that proposal, I've stolen from another state and their bylaws, and I've tried to make it fit here in the state of North Carolina, having been here for 22 years and learned a little bit about our state. So I don't think there's anything that I'm missing from other state associations that they have in place where it's approved. Honestly, I mean, Nick, I would just like to see some of our leaders have conversations about this with other state associations, right, that have it in place. And, if you have the competitive imbalance concern, call them. Hey, are you seeing this? This is my concern. What do you guys see in your state? You've allowed this to go on. Some states for 20, 30 years now have been allowing this. If it was so bad, Nick, why do they still allow it? That there was a competitive imbalance if it wasn't working. I mean, you're talking some states in the early 90s have implemented it, and it's still in existence today. So I just hope that I don't know. I'm trying to walk a fine line. I just wish that they would look into it. And if this isn't the solution to the participation issues, well, then find something. Because again, I feel for these kids and parents at those schools we mentioned earlier that they can't play a sport that they love. And so what are they going to do this fall?
You mentioned the participation issues. That's a story that I enjoy digging into every year when we get the participation data. One reason why on Varsity NC I have interactive participation analytics tool that you can go in and compare all the data around. But I do think, as someone who's looked at that data for almost 20 years now, I think it's important for people to understand that we'll celebrate that participation goes up. I think we had an all-time high in participation last year, or
Sure.
I'm sorry, the year before last. We don't have this past year's data yet. But and we celebrated that football participation went up overall. But there are stories below that where it's not necessary just because it's gone up statewide does not mean it's going up everywhere. And there are discrepancies in different parts of the state. Some of your more rural communities where they're losing population or having bigger struggles. But it's not limited to that. I mean, there are big city schools that have problems, putting teams on the field,
Sure.
full teams on the field. So I just think people should be careful about reading too much into the participation data because just because it goes up doesn't necessarily mean it's going up everywhere. And one of the key things I think to look at every year is the number may go up, but how about the number of teams that were fielded? Did that go up or did that go down? Because sometimes the participation itself goes up, but the number of schools offering a sport actually declines.
Mhm.
And that's another key thing I think people should pay attention to. We should be getting that data for 25, 26 anytime now. Usually it comes out the month of August. So hopefully we'll get that soon. How confident are you that co-op teams will eventually become part of the NCHSAA? And if there are athletic directors or principals or other uh, coaches, anybody who's in a sphere of influence somewhere watching this, if they're interested about this or really supportive about it, what should they do to help get this across the goal line?
Good question. First part, am I optimistic? I try to be a very optimistic person and see the best, and I'm hopeful that this is I think the second or third time where I've had the opportunity to talk to somebody about this, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on here, Nick. So I'm hopeful that it will be passed here in the near future. What can people do? I think I was kind of I was really down on the last spring board meeting. I was hopeful that maybe they'd take a second look at it. But I'm not willing to give up. I'm willing to continue the conversation. So if you're interested, I would love to share the proposal I had, and maybe you have some insight, maybe have some suggestions for me to change it, and join me on the proposal. The more names that we add to the list when we send it in, the more names of people in central office positions, superintendents, principals. I think that carries a greater weight. I was just the only one to do this in the winter. In the spring, I was able to get my conference athletic directors, my conference ads. I told you about Carteret County. So the more we push for this to be looked at, I think they will, um, look at it more intently and maybe have a different decision to implement it.
One last question for you. If this does ultimately become a policy here in North Carolina, what difference do you hope it makes for high school athletes in our state?
I hope that it gives them an opportunity when one's not there for them. And I hope that it allows athletic directors and schools and athletic departments to look at trends, look at enrollments, and in order to sustain programs, maybe the best decision is to go this route because they don't want to be in a position like we just discussed with other schools where they're having to sit down with families and student athletes and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, we can't field a team this year." So I just want there to be a solution to this situation that is happening for schools and school and programs throughout our state.
He is Northwood Athletic Director Cameron Vernon. Appreciate the time. I think this is a really interesting proposal. I think people should give it a look, even if they end up saying, "Oh, that's not for me." I think it's worth
Sure.
taking the time. I think the participation issue in high school is probably going to take several different approaches
Yep.
working together.
Like I said, anybody watching this, if you email me, you want to see it, I'll be glad to share everything that I shared in the spring and in the winter for you to take a look at. And I welcome the further conversation on this.
Cameron, thanks for the time and keep us posted as this progresses.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it.